Sometimes life gives you questions and you need help finding the answers. Sometimes you need the right tool for the job. Sometimes you need the inspector.
Continuing our exploration of the inspector, we're going to focus on audio this time. Again, anything with the inspector starts by making sure the inspector window is turned on, top right-hand corner of your screen. Just press that button. And paying attention to what clip is selected on the timeline. So I'm going to single click this clip right here that has Scott steaming the milk. By default, the inspector went to video. I can just come over and click on the audio tab. And just a quick scroll to show you some of what's in here. Not as many options as there were for video, but still some pretty useful ones. The very first one is clip volume. Now, we worked with this earlier by coming to the timeline and clicking and dragging to move a volume up or down. You can do the same thing with the inspector, and there's a little bit of advantage to doing it that way. Watch what happens now. I have this clip selected. If I click and drag this volume up and down, you can see down there on the timeline I've made the entire clip quieter, and you can see on the timeline I've made the entire clip louder. And I can even do this by typing in values. If I want the entire thing to be, say, 6 decibels louder, I'll just type in 6, enter, and I've boosted everything by 6 decibels. Notice that these changes are affecting both Audio 1 and Audio 2. When I did this previously by clicking and dragging, it's a little bit of an easier interface. I wanted to do that to avoid opening the inspector and complicating things. But you had to do track 1 and then do track 2 separately. Let me undo those. Undo. If both of your tracks are the same, and in this case they are, it actually is a little bit easier to select this and then go to the audio tab of the inspector and manipulate the volume this way. Not to minimize the ability of simply typing in a numeric value. That's not always going to be the case, and particularly if you return for the 300 and 400 level classes, it will be unusual for Audio 1 and Audio 2 to be the same. But in this case, it works to our advantage. Now, panning does what you assume it would do. I can move audio to the left or the right. So in this case, I could take Scott's audio and pan it all the way to the left. And then I could select the music track underneath it and pan that all the way to the right. So if you've got headphones on, what should happen when I hit play is you hear Scott steaming and talking in the left, and you hear the musical track. It'll be faint, but you'll hear it on the right.
You can tell by the sound it's making. Now we're ready to start just dropping the milk below the level of where the steam comes in. This is what creates the nice rich foam.
Okay. I'm going to reset that. And I'm going to reset that. It's a little bit annoying in that it keeps jumping to the video. But so you could use this if you had a scene where two people had a dialogue, right? And Bob is on the left side of the screen and Ted's on the right side of the screen. You could take all of Bob's dialogue and move it to the left, maybe not all the way, but off center to the left, and then take Ted's dialogue and move it off to the right a little bit. And that way, if somebody's watching in a surround sound environment or with headphones on, you actually get a little bit of reinforcement. Not only do you see the relationship on the screen with one of them being screen left and one being screen right, but you're hearing it echoed in your headphones, or hearing it echoed in the viewing environment. The fact that Bob is to your left and Ted is to your right. Clip pitch. Now this is fun to play with. I haven't found much practical use, but you can actually make a person's voice or music higher pitched or lower pitched. A semitone it corresponds to one step up or a half step up. So if you're looking at a piano keyboard, for example, as you move from an E to an F, that's one half step or a semitone. 12 semitones is one octave. So if I select this, and again, go back to my audio tab, I could avoid that if I clicked on the audio when I clicked on the clip. It's just habit for me to click on the video. So I have selected this, and I am going to take Scott, and I'm going to lower him by half an octave. So that would be 6 semitones, -3, 4, -5, -6. And we're going for a little bit more Darth Vader feel. Let's see what it sounds like.
You can tell by the sound it's making. I'm ready to start just dropping the milk below the level of the...
That's crazy, isn't it? Maybe we want to go for something a little bit more chipmunk-like. So let's move it up to a +6, half an octave up.
I'm ready to start just dropping the milk below the...
I find that funny. A cent is a smaller unit of measurement. So let me reset that. If I were to up him by 6 cents, okay, it's too hard for me to do it. I'm just going to type it in there. Rather than 6 semitones, it'll be a smaller change.
Start just dropping the milk below the...
It's a very small change. So even if I crank this thing up to 100 cents.
Just dropping the milk below the level of the...
So I think what this is a percentage of a semitone. So by moving it up 100 cents, I actually have increased it by 1 semitone. This is really, really powerful if you're doing some sort of singing deal and your talent is just a little bit flat or just a little bit sharp. This is auto-tune, people, except there's no auto to it. But you can take somebody that's just a little bit flat or a little bit sharp, and you can tweak it. The cent allows you to tweak it by just a little bit, and the semitone allows you to do it larger. And I could combine these, right? I could increase this by 1 semitone and 25 cents. I think the cent
I'm ready to start just dropping the milk below the level of the...
This concept of cents is actually a little bit new to me. Usually that's a level of refinement that we don't play with in the video production world, but in the last few years, it's started to creep into video editing software. So this is something I'm still learning about a little bit. And I'm probably mispronouncing it. It's probably not cents because I think that's short for centurion or something to do with cent is 100, right? The centennial. Okay, anyway, moving on. Let me scroll down to the bottom here. Our last section is the clip equalizer. And this is a relatively large area, so I'm going to resize my screen just a little bit so that I can see what's going on here. And let me manipulate the zoom accordingly. If you've played with equalizers before, this works like a very simple equalizer. And if you haven't, what an equalizer allows you to do is to take a certain range of frequencies, a certain range of pitch, and make it louder or quieter. So I'm going to turn this on. And by default, it already has some equalization applied. So band 1, band 2, band 3, band 4 correspond to these 4 little icons, these 4 little dots that you see on the screen. And I can click and move those, and I will as we move along. As you read this across the bottom, the measurement is in hertz, and at the bottom end, the left is 0 hertz. And we go all the way up to the top, which is 16,000 hertz or 16 kilohertz. This is roughly the range of human hearing. Probably, even though you guys are still pretty young, you all live in an industrial society, you've probably got enough hearing damage that you cannot hear 16 kilohertz anymore. But don't worry, it only gets worse as you age. My hearing peaks somewhere around 12 kilohertz these days, and that's just common. As you get older, you lose your high-frequency hearing. If you live in an industrial nation, you lose it much more quickly. And if, like your instructor, you're a fan of heavy metal music and like to go to rock concerts, you lose it quicklier still. I can turn these on and off simply by clicking on the numbers. So here I have no equalization whatsoever. So what this tells me looking left to right is that from 0 hertz to 16 kilohertz, I have made no changes. So this blue line is vertically indicating amplification or making it quieter, whatever the opposite of amplification is. So the straight line means I've done nothing to it. So let me turn on band 1 here. And underneath each one of these, there's a drop-down menu that lets me choose what kind of equalization I'm applying. Notice that there are several here. By default, band 1 goes to this. This is called a shelf filter. It's basically cutting everything off at the low end and letting the high end go through. So this is a high shelf filter. And it's set at the moment to act on anything that's lower than 50 hertz. Now this is safe. The human voice, the male human voice, reaches down to about 100 hertz. The female human voice reaches down to about 150 hertz. So as long as your number is lower than that, you're not going to interfere with anyone's voice, unless you have James Earl Jones doing the voice of Darth Vader, in which case that's different. If you're recording a bass guitar or a cello, a string bass, anything that's known for low frequencies, this is a bad idea. But most noise in your house tends to be on the low end. The hum of a refrigerator, the whine of a fan, the hum caused by bad electric wiring. That's actually at 60 hertz. So I can change this. I can either grab this icon and click and drag it to the right, or I can actually click inside this window and drag to the right. Oddly enough, I can't type in this window, but I can run this up to 100 hertz or thereabouts and be very safe. So let's listen to the sound of him steaming and see if this makes a difference. I'm going to turn it off and play the clip.
Where the steam comes in. This is what creates the nice rich foam.
Okay, hang on. Let me turn off the music. I should have done that first. Let's just listen to the tail end here.
Foam.
Okay, you can hear the refrigerator running in the background, right? Listen very carefully.
Foam.
Okay, let's turn on the equalizer and see if that helps.
Foam.
Okay, that didn't help at all. The refrigerator noise is higher pitched, but that was a good guess. It was a good thing to try. Now I can put other types of equalization here. So again, at the moment, what I have is a high shelf. This one is a low shelf, right? It allows everything that's lower frequency. So if I were to put this over here on the left-hand side, you can see the graph change. The only thing that I'm going to hear now is low-pitched sounds, lower than 100 hertz. And then somewhere between 100 hertz and up here, they're going to fade off until I hear nothing. So probably I'm going to hear not too much.
You start just dropping the milk below the level of the...
Right, so it sounds like he's yelling from the backside of a mattress. I've got a pillow over his head and I'm trying to suffocate him. This is called I think they call this a low pass. I'm sorry, a high pass. It's like a high shelf, but it's more gentle, right? So everything that I do is affecting noise lower than 100 hertz. But suddenly I have this gain option. How much do I want it to affect that? So I can actually bring that noise down, and if I bring it far enough, it'll hit whatever the maximum throw is there, so that there's no sound coming out. I've just recreated the shelf here, but I can use this if perhaps I'd had a band recording and the bass drum is a little bit too loud. Well, the bass drum is very low frequency. I can make it quieter without silencing it by using this type of high pass filter. This is called a Bell filter, and what it does is it affects a central frequency. Right now that central frequency is 100 hertz. And again, I can play with the gain here, and I can actually make it louder, not only quieter, if there's something that I want to make louder. And then this thing at the bottom that just appeared, Q, is how wide that area is, how wide that bell is. So if I make my Q if I make my Q large, you can see that that area is getting smaller and smaller. So I could use this to isolate a specific frequency. Again, if you were doing a 60 hertz hum, you could make a very narrow filter, center the frequency at 60 hertz, and take it out that way. Let me relax my Q a little bit and pump the gain up. Right? Maybe, again, I'm recording a string quartet And the string bass was farther away from my microphone than anything else, so it's a little bit quiet. So maybe this would be a way that I can enhance the performance and hear the bass a little bit better without hearing all of the other instruments overwhelm it. This next one down is a notch filter. And I actually just created a notch filter using the earlier one. But this is a better example of it. It has a very tight Q, so it affects very little on either side. But again, if I were to need to get rid of my 60 hertz hum, right, I could just put my notch filter right there at 60 hertz. And there you go. You've all heard a 60 hertz hum. You've been in an auditorium that had a cheap PA system, and it always went whenever nobody was talking. Or you've heard somebody plug in an electric guitar to an amp that was turned up. You get that for a moment. That sound is a 60 hertz frequency because the alternating current that American electricity runs off of vibrates at 60 hertz. So anytime you have an amplifier hooked to an electrical circuit that's not properly shielded, as in it might have been built 40 or 50 years ago, you get that sound, that particular sound in this country. The 60 hertz hum is the most annoying sound that exists to anyone who's trying to record clean audio. And then these bottom ones are just the inverse, right? So before I had a high pass filter, this is a low pass filter, right? So it affects everything to the right of my frequency. Let me bump my frequency up a little bit, and then I can pull that gain up or down. So this is going to allow me to do the same thing. I can bump the high end up or down. And then the last one down there is, I'm sorry, this one we started with. It's just a reverse shelf there. This is a low shelf, right? So it cuts off, not only lets the low frequencies through. Wow, that was a lot of explaining. So let me reset this and turn it back on. So by default, you have these things set up. It does cut off the low end. So by default, it gives you a low shelf. I'm sorry, a high shelf, because the high frequencies are making it through. It's easy to get confused when you talk about this, right? But you can see graphically what's going on. So this first one by default is cutting off your low end noise. And that's almost always a safe thing to do. And again, that number by default is 50. I usually run that up to 100 or thereabouts. My fingers are shaky and the mouse is sensitive, so I have a hard time hitting it exactly. So I'll run that low end up to about 100. Again, I'm not in any danger of losing a person's voice, and I'm not in any danger of losing most things musical unless it is something bassy, something deep. If I'm recording James Earl Jones and a string bass, I've got a problem. I'll have to change that. Also, by default, band 4 tapers off. And you'll see that it tapers off around 10 kilohertz, 10,000 hertz. Most of the human voice is between 500 hertz and 4,000 hertz. And you can actually see this is the range right here. This goes down to 250, but really most of it, and most of it is here in this 1 to 4 kilohertz range. So as long as you're not playing with stuff between this 250 low end and this 4K high end, you're not going to hurt anyone's voice. But some high end stuff can be noise. And you've all heard electronics that make a high-pitched whine. Yeah, a lot of that is above the range of the human voice. So having this top end turned on usually doesn't hurt anything. Now again, if I'm recording somebody playing a flute or a piccolo or a penny whistle, then this becomes a bad idea. But as far as general practice goes, and particularly with voices, leaving this guy on, taking off that high end, doesn't really hurt anything, and it's more likely to help. It's more likely that anything you recorded that high frequency is noise. So these two in the middle are really the only thing that you have to play with. So maybe what I would like to do is give Scott a little bit more bass presence to his voice. So I'm going to turn on that bell filter, and I'm going to run that frequency down just a little bit. Maybe somewhere around 350 hertz, and I'm going to pull it up. Now notice I can do this by clicking and dragging here. I could also do it by clicking and dragging the gain volume here. And The Q, again, is how wide that range is. I'm going to narrow that down a little bit. I think what this should do is just give him a little more boom in his voice. He should sound a little more male, a little more authoritarian. Let's see if it worked.
The milk's starting to get good and hot, and we can tell by the sound
Okay, I'm going to turn it off.
it's making. And we're ready to start just dropping the milk below the level of where the steam.
Okay, that's really not making much of a difference, is it? I'm going to exaggerate it by making it a more noticeable spike.
We can tell by the sound it's making. And we're ready to start just dropping the milk below the level of where the steam comes in.
Start earlier.
The milk's starting to get good and hot, and we can tell by the sound it's making. And we're ready to start just.
Okay, that definitely gives him a little more presence at the low end. It's not a night and day difference, but it definitely has some effect. Again, at the moment, I'm just piddling around with things, but this can be really useful. And if nothing else, if you end up with a video that you've got some low end background noise, wind rumble is very low frequency. So if you were shooting outside and you get that that comes from the wind hitting the microphone directly, this low cut shelf, or this high shelf rather, can come in really handy. And likewise, if you're shooting somewhere, maybe your refrigerator makes that really high-pitched singing sound when it's running. Maybe just by using a little EQ, you can take it out of there. There is a much more powerful tool for working with audio, and that is the Fairlight page. But for the moment, let's stick with the simplicity that's offered here. So using the inspector window and going to the audio tab gives you a way to control your volume, your stereo panning. And again, this clip pitch can both be comic, like I made Scott into the Chipmunk, or again, if I wanted to create that James Earl Jones effect of Darth Vader. But it can also be used if your pitch is a little bit off. Again, you're trying to sing, you're sending in an audition tape to America's Next Funny TV show, whatever. You can fix your audio. You can fix the fact that you can't sing. Okay, you can't fix the fact that you can't sing, but you can sure make it sound like you're better than you are by working with this area here. It's slow and it's painful and it takes a lot of patience, but it can be done. Okay, I think that wraps it up for basic instruction on the inspector. I have no idea what is coming next, but I'm sure it'll be fun.